Okay, so back in Portland, had a weekend in Moppin, took the bikes out, didn't ride them. It was grey and a bit too miserable, and there was a ton of yard work to do. So there was weeding to be done and fires to be made, which is always a good thing. And so tonight, back in Portland, and tonight I am reading The Tale of Jeremy Fisher with half a pint of gin. It's my second one. All right, here we go. Once upon a time, there was a frog called Mr. Jeremy Fisher. He lived in a damp house amongst the buttercups at the edge of a pond. The water was all slippy sloppy in the larder and in the back passage. But Mr. Jeremy liked getting his feet wet. Nobody ever scolded him, and he never caught a cold. There he is, slip-slopping around his back passage. He was quite pleased when he looked out and saw large drops of rain splashing in the pond. Oh, look, he's got fancy windows. I will get some worms and go fishing and catch a dish of minnows for my dinner, said Jeremy Fisher. If I catch more than 5 fish, I will invite my friends. Mr. Alderman told me Tortoise and Sir Isaac Newton. This man had friends. The Alderman, however, eats salad. Mr. Jeremy put on a mackintosh and a pair of shiny galoshes. He took his rod and basket and set off with enormous hops to the place where he kept his boat. There you go. He looks more like he's flying in that one than hopping. The boat was round and green and very like the other lily leaves. It was tied to a water plant in the middle of the pond. Mr. Jeremy took a reed pole and pushed the boat out into the open water. I know a good place for minnows, said Jeremy Fisher. Mr. Jeremy stuck his pole in the mud and fastened his boat to it. Then he settled himself cross-legged and arranged his fishing tackle. He had a dearest little red float. His rod was a tough stalk of grass, his line a fine, long, white horsehair, and he tied a little wriggling worm to the end. The rain trickled down his back, and for nearly an hour he stared at the float. This is getting tiresome. I think I should like some lunch, said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. He punted back again amongst the water plants and took some lunch out of his basket. I will eat a butterfly sandwich and wait till this shower is over, said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. A great big water beetle came up underneath the lily leaf and tweaked the toe of one of his galoshes. Mr. Jeremy crossed his legs up shorter, out of reach, and went on eating his sandwich. Once or twice, something moved about with a rustle and a splash amongst the rushes on the side of the pond. I trust that is not a rat, said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. I think I'd better get away from here. There is a rat swimming in the water. Mr. Jeremy shoved the boat out again a little way and dropped in the bait. And there was a bite, almost directly. The float gave a tremendous bobbit. A minnow! A minnow! I have him by the nose! Cried Jeremy Fisher, jerking up his rod. But what a horrible surprise! Instead of a smooth, fat minnow, Mr. Jeremy landed little Jack Sharp, a stickleback, covered with spines. The stickleback floundered about the boat, pricking and snapping until he was quite out of breath, and then he jumped back in the water. And a shoal of other little fishes put their heads out and laughed at Jeremy Fisher. And while Jeremy sat disconsolately on the edge of his boat, sucking his sore fingers and peering down into the water, a much worse thing happened. A really frightful thing. It would have been if Jeremy had not been wearing a Macintosh. A great big, enormous trout came up, kerflop, with a splash, and it seized Mr. Jeremy, with a snap. Ow, ow, ow! And then it turned and dived down into the bottom of the pond. I think Jeremy Fisher's in trouble. But the trout was so displeased with the taste of the Macintosh that in less than half a minute it spat him out again, and the only thing it swallowed was Mr. Jeremy's goloshes. Mr. Jeremy bounced up to the surface, out of the water like a cork, and the bubbles out of a soda water bottle, and he swam with all his might to the edge of the pond. I think we'd call that a close shave. He scrambled out onto the first bank he came to, and he hopped home across the meadow with his Macintosh all in tatters. "What a mercy that was not a pike," said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. "I have lost my rod and basket, but it does not matter, for I am sure I should never have dared to go fishing again." And he put some sticking plaster on his fingers, and his friends both came to dinner. He could not offer them fish, but he had something else in his larder. Here they are. Sir Isaac Newton wore his black and gold waistcoat. I think we should all have one of those. And Mr. Alderman Tolmie Tortoise brought a salad with him in a string bag. This is a bit tricky to see, but there you go. And instead of a nice dish of minnows, they had roasted grasshopper with ladybird sauce, which frogs consider a beautiful treat. But I think it was nasty. And there they all are, having dinner. All right, I think that one made up for last night's very short story. Beatrix Potter clearly had got to the end of her tether last night. Good night. See you tomorrow.